Palm Sunday, you would have learned the fun surprise that I'm doing a sermon series through Holy Week called The More Things Change, the More They Stay the Same. Yes, that is a reference to Bon Jovi, not Cinderella. Any Cinderella fans? Okay. And today we're going to be looking at how things have changed since Maundy Thursday, or the first Maundy Thursday, but in some ways, how they're still the same. And I think we can see this because one of the things that we see, if we look through that whole reading today, and we examine everything everyone does, especially the disciples, there is one emotion that I think comes out more than any other. That emotion is fear. And if we're honest about the past few years, the one emotion that I think captures 2020, 2021, and at least the first part of 2022 is probably fear, right? I mean, you can come up with a list of things people are legitimately scared of out there during that period of time, right? And I think fear is one of these things that we as Christians have to always be aware of. Because I would say that the opposite of fear isn't courage. Because someone who's courageous has fear, they just get over it, right? That's what General Patton said. The opposite of fear isn't love, because the opposite of love is apathy. I think the opposite of fear is faith. I think the only cure for fear is faith itself. What do I mean? Well, let's look at the three big moments of fear. The first moment of fear, I think, is the least obvious, but I think is a very legitimate one. So as we were reading through that, we have this moment where Jesus is starting to lay out, like, this is what's going to happen, right? He just did communion, right? Like, you'd think everyone would be all interested in what's going on, and he's just called out Judas, not by name, but said, like, one of you is going to betray me. You would think if you were there, that would be, like, the thing to talk about, right? Like, okay, who is that person? But before long, what are they talking about? Who's going to be the greatest? Like, talk about the most ridiculous argument to have on Maundy Thursday. Of all the things to be talking about, the disciples are arguing over, well, he might die, but which one of us is the most awesome? I mean, talk about not getting what's going on in front of you, right? But I think it's deeper than just bravado, deeper than just machismo, deeper than just being silly. I think what's really going on there is they're scared. I think they actually heard Jesus. I think they heard that Jesus is going to go and probably going to die, and this wasn't what they signed up for. And I thought we were having a military campaign. That's why we got two swords over there. I mean, it's a small start, but it's a start. See, I think what's going on is they're scared. Remember on Palm Sunday I said that there are two feelings, one of excitement, but one of dread, because they didn't know who would make it through the upcoming battle they thought was going to occur? I think the disciples are being overtaken by that dread. And so I think the argument is more like, dude, I'm going to be so awesome. When I go to heaven, I am definitely not going to get the seat I'm definitely not getting the room by the water cooler or by the ice machine, because I am going to be the best. But if you think about it, that sort of fear is a fear that exists. Not just then, but it exists now. Let me illustrate something. I love old church architecture. Anyone else with me on this? Who loves old church architecture? I love go touring these old churches. But I'll tell you, as a pastor, it is this mixed feeling many times, because you'll go in these beautiful, gorgeous, massive old churches. And I'll walk around, and I love reading every plaque. I'm that dude who takes like 3 hours to go through a church because I read every plaque. And as I walk through and I read the plaque, it will be this dedicated by this person, or this dedicated to this person, or this for this reason, right? And I'll say it's a really mixed feeling for me, because in that moment I will see the deep faith that former generations had. But I also sometimes can read the undoing of that faith. Because what you'll find is you'll start off with plaques commemorating the great ministry this person did. But then as you work your way chronologically, it will become in memory of this, in memory of that person, in memory of this person, in memory of that person. Because what you find in these churches, especially those that have come and gone and stand like dead volcanoes once active, you'll find that as they transition from being a vibrant place of Christ's ministry to a tomb of what once was, there's a period in which they dedicated everything to try to get money for it. And so you have dusty plaques, not to a ministry, not to the glory of God, not to something greater, but to this person or that person. And I think what you had was fear. You have people who are scared that someday their legacy might fall apart and no one will remember me, so I know I'll stick a plaque on it, on something that in my world or in my time seemed would never be gone. But that has more to do with the person's fear of death than the glorification of God. Just like I think the discussion of who is the greatest has more to do with the fear of death than the glorification of what God's calling them to do in that moment. Now, the second moment where I think fear overcomes faith with the disciples is this moment in time that we see as we go through it. So, right, we have this here in which they're arguing. But then you have this moment where presumably Peter, Luke doesn't say who it is, but other Gospels do, say presumably Peter pulls out his sword and he strikes violently at the high chief's servant, cutting his ear off. In all the Gospels where this is talked about, Jesus immediately steps in and says, "Stop, this is not what I'm about," and heals the ear, right? I think this is an important thing of what is the danger of letting fear overcome faith. This first example is just one that's sort of silly and sad at best, but the second one is where we show the danger that fear itself presents. Why? Because fear, as we have seen through history, it doesn't matter what time, what group, what culture, what person, how sophisticated, how educated, or not, fear begets violence. You look at any history of any country in which there was mass violence, where does it begin? It begins with a large amount of fear. And I think we see that moment where the fear has so grasped Peter that he lashes out and begins to fight the thing he is scared of. He was like, you know what? I'm tired of being scared. Let's just get this fight going and figure out where it all ends up. Figure out who ends up next to the ice cooler in heaven. And so he tries to start it. But God, being a God of faith, steps in and heals and treats his enemies with love. And it's when we treat our enemies with love that we can dial down fear. But then, of course, there is this great moment of fear right at the end of Maundy Thursday. It is just about Good Friday. All sorts of kangaroo courts have been going on all night. Peter's been sort of hanging around saying, like, are they going to let Jesus out? What in bejeebers is taking so long in there? I thought they would just take him, they'd do something and release him. What is going on, right? This is an all-night meeting is happening. And he's standing out in the cold, and people start saying, hey, you came with the guy who's in there, didn't you? Or, hey, I'm pretty sure I saw you with him. Or, hey, you're a Galilean, surely the only reason a Galilean would be out here is if you were this other guy. And Peter, in that moment, is grasped with fear. Now, I don't think that Peter has forgotten what Jesus told him a few hours earlier over dinner, right? If someone came to you, especially if you believed that person was the Messiah, looked you straight in the eyes and said, you are going to go ahead and deny me before the cock crows, and you're going to deny me 3 times, and you were to respond to that person, no, I will go to the ends of the earth. I will die with you. I'll go to prison with you. You don't forget that 6 hours, 12 hours later, do you? No. Peter hasn't forgotten it. He is so grasped by fear. Fear of imprisonment, fear of death, fear of what they might do to him or his family. He is so terrorized into silence that when faced with the simple question, are you with this man? All his resolve, all his bravado, all his faith crumbles in staring down fear. The reality for us as Christians each and every day is, well, hopefully we are never put into anything close to the sort of world Peter got stuck in. Hopefully we will never live through, and we're very unlikely to have ever lived through any of this level of fear. We still face fear, right? It's scary to invite someone to church. Not Peter level scary, but still scary, right? Very few people are just like, oh yeah, I'm totally comfortable. If I like someone, I'll just invite them, right? For us Lutherans, it's hard. It's scary. It's scary to go and do those things that the Holy Spirit is tugging you to do. When you see the person who's hurt, when you see the person who's in need, and you have that tug from the Holy Spirit that says, go help them, or go say hi to them, go see if they need help. Almost immediately, I don't know about you, there's a little bit of fear, like, what happens if they yell at me? What happens if they're just going to scam me? What happens, right? We've all had these thoughts. See, part of walking the Christian life day in and day out, part of being a person of faith, is that you show down with fear over and over and over again. For God calls us into these uncomfortable places, into these moments of fear, so that we have moments where faith triumphs. So as you go out this week, take some time. And even though the more things change, the more they stay the same, know that when you face your own little moments of fear, that God calls you to step up, act with courage, act with boldness, but most of all, act with faith. The only thing that defeats fear is faith itself.